I would like to say good evening to everyone. Dear members and friends, I would like to welcome you all to our online presentation on information warfare. My name is Pavlo Kucher, and I'm the Vice President of the Ukrainian National Federation, Ottawa Gatineau. We're the oldest, the largest, and the only Ukrainian-Canadian organization that was established by an act of Canadian Federal Parliament. Today's presentation is part of the UNF Ottawa Gatineau event series, where we invite our UNF members as speakers. Our member, Platon Boyko, has graciously agreed to take a chair as a moderator for this event, and I'm excited and amazed to welcome our special guest and long-standing member, Borys Sirskyj.
Так що я не думаю, що пана Бориса треба багато представляти. Ми українською взагалі чи англійською, Павло?
This is English. The presentation is in English.
Okay, yes, all right. So I don't think pan Boris needs a long introduction, but for those of us who haven't met him yet or haven't heard of him, he served for a long time with the Canadian intelligence community, and the topic that he's going to be talking about today is his he's a professional in terms of informational warfare and counteracting such efforts. So Boris is an expert. He knows what he's talking about, not from books, not from TV, but from his own experience, from his work with the Canadian intelligence community. Pane Boris, the floor is all yours.
Дякую. Ladies and gentlemen, пані і панове, слава Україні! It's indeed a great pleasure and honor to be here today with you, and I'm truly grateful to have been invited by the Ukrainian National Federation of Ottawa Gatineau to speak this evening. Before I commence in English, I'm going to divert into Ukrainian for about a minute because we have about 50 very special guests. And these are young students from Ukraine who will shortly be coming to Canada to join the Canada-Ukrainian Parliamentary Program. And I would very much like, just in one brief minute, to welcome them to this webinar in Ukrainian. Дорогі друзі, які швиденько в майбутньому будете тут на нашій канадській землі, як частину канадської української парламентарної програми, яка, як ви знаєте, вже давно було започатковано дуже славним адвокатом паном Ігорем Бардином. Вже дуже давно. Але мій старий колега, чи молодий колега радше з пласту, який віддав свою душу, щоб створити цю програму, щоб дати нагоду наймолодшим поколінням мати трошки змоги виїхати до другої держави і вивчати демократичний процес, який діє тут на нашому терені. То, дорогі друзі, я вас щиро сердечно вітаю. Ви будете майбутніми провідниками вашої держави України. Служіть її, але служіть її чесно, совісно і не впадайте в то море корупції. Бо це є це море, що нищить сьогодні Україну. Вашим обов'язком буде служити перше українському народові, а тоді вашому урядові. Я вас дуже прошу, благаю, служіть тій державі, бо вона є дійсно прекрасна. Бо якщо ви цього не зробите, вона пропаде через ту корупцію. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, I commend my friends from the UNF for organizing this event, as it is a first. And in my professional opinion, this is a story, an important and vital story that needs to be told. And I begin with this. I had the great honor and privilege of serving Canada as an intelligence officer for almost 4 decades with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, a truly wonderful and magnificent organization, one of the best organizations of this kind in the entire world, in my opinion. The greater part of my career was in counterintelligence. I worked against the Russian intelligence services and the multiple threats that they pose to this great country of ours. But I'd just like to amend my comments here. We did not work against the Russian people, because amongst the Russian people, there are very many kind and decent ones. It is against the system that we worked. As such, given my background, I'd like to begin this session by setting the tone with an overview of the threat environment in general, going back in history to examine when and how the Cold War began, who's behind it, how they operated here in Canada, and why I believe that the beginning of this story began right here in our own country. So you can clearly understand the magnitude of the threats posed not only to Canada, but to the world, and especially to Ukraine. Lastly, I will attempt to offer a salient definition of information warfare and then examine how and why the Russian Federation targeted Canada, but particularly the Ukrainian community. And so let us begin our historical journey together. It was the first great alert sounded for the free world by Ihor Guzenko when he uncovered the Canadian Soviet spy ring of highly intellectual professionals, including a millionaire and men who belonged to the social and academic establishment which traced this pattern. This was repeated in the case of Kim Philby, Dave McLean, and Guy Burgess in the famous His trial, and discoveries which led to the eventual execution in the electric chair of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg for their part in the Klaus Fuchs espionage on the atom bomb. And this all began on the evening of December 5th, 1945, with the defection of Ihor Guzenko, Soviet code clerk at the Russian embassy in Ottawa, himself of Ukrainian extraction, who revealed to the West for the first time startling information about Soviet intelligence operations against the British, American, and Canadian atomic research effort. Guzenko brought out with him coded telegrams related to source Molière, code name for the Soviet consular official in New York. In fact, it was the Soviet vice consul, Anatoly Yakovlev, in New York, who, when Guzenko's leads were investigated, proved to be the man who directed the Harry Gold, Green Glass Rosenberg Klaus Fuchs network, which had penetrated right into the Alamo Research Center. You know, ladies and gentlemen, in those days, there were no computers. He couldn't bring out a chip or something to convince the Canadian police. At that time, it was the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who were the security service. He brought out with him 145 of intelligence stuffed all over his body when it came to us. So I'm just explaining that. Since Soviet and now Russian tactics have basically not changed, and the aggrandizement of Soviet power is being pursued by the same draconic and drastic measures today, we must heed the story of Guzenko. This, ladies and gentlemen, in a nutshell, is what began the Cold War, and in my opinion, it never ended. Never ended for the ambitions of the Kremlin. They have never varied. Today, we have a new generation growing up in the West, wanting for nothing. To the majority of them, these startling facts are unknown, and the dangers of Russia seem distant from whence Guzenko first alerted the world. But what Guzenko wrote and described in 1945 is as true and timely today in 2020. We must not forget that true weapon essential for safeguarding freedom and awareness of a danger to which others, less fortunate, have succumbed. Guzenko's testimony on international espionage sparked an international investigation which left the free world highly conscious of the peril first created by the Red Empire of Moscow. it lies in the profound, unusual, and daring tribute paid our free way of life by Guzenko. Because, ladies and gentlemen, he risked his life to espouse what we so casually accept as our birthright. By his very selfless act, he helped to safeguard our great heritage of freedom. And that is how it all began. And from then, Russian intelligence officers, in those days, both from the KGB and the GRU, or the Russian military intelligence, they employed classical tradecraft throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, focusing what? On human, as we call it in our profession, or human intelligence collection through the recruitment of sources worldwide in many different countries to obtain what? Secrets from Western powers, but primarily which were focused on military and political subjects. In 1980, with the advent of the personal desktop computer, the manner in which public and private sectors conducted business and provided services to the public at large changed immeasurably. Additionally, disinformation or disinformation was a seminal weapon in the KGB's Cold War arsenal, with the goals and objectives of classic propaganda remaining largely consistent. Indeed, the Russian intent to meddle via disinformation and propaganda is enduring. But what makes the effort both potent and unprecedented was the medium through which disinformation and propaganda has been weaponized. That is the most substantial change which has increased the volume of information being disseminated. To be sure, networks, phishing, hacking, and social engineering are simply a new dimension to an age-old game. And then yet, another major event transpired: globalization, with economic interdependence and international competition having emerged as major sources of tension and conflict among world powers. And this, ladies and gentlemen, led many governments to shift the focus of their intelligence collection away from the traditional areas of political and military matters to the illicit acquisition of economic and technological information. For example, Canada is a world leader in many technology-intensive fields: aerospace, biotechnology, chemical, communications, infotechnology, being key industrial sectors in the Canadian economy, the protection of which is essential to the economic well-being of Canada. And the damage to Canadian interests when our classified information is stolen or compromised. It takes the forms of lost contracts, jobs, and markets, and a diminished competitive edge. I remember being involved in numerous investigations involving foreign nationals working in a Canadian company. Because we have to understand, Canadians have a big heart. They wish to share, so they took these foreign nationals. Information started to disappear. Investigations resulted. We've had foreign scientists working in the biotech sector. What did they do? They were stealing lab cultures and manuals. Because we trusted them, we allowed them into the laboratory at 4 in the morning. That's the way it is. And then we get to the late 80s and the 90s. The world changed yet again. The Russian bear, economically challenged, clawed its way back into its cave for the next almost decade. But it was not sleeping. For many in the intelligence world, Russia, in the words of Sir Winston Churchill, was still a riddle wrapped in a mystery, inside an enigma. For me, no. There was a key to understanding all the transformations of the time, and I will share those with you. And that key were 3 words: Russian national interest. At that time, it was tempting for us here in the West to witness the vast sea of change which transpired since the early 1990s, and especially in people's psychology, and then to interpret them through the prism of our own values, our own political framework. We assume we understand what is really going on in Russia For we assumed that as soon as people were given freedom, they would behave as we do. Our framework is capitalism and multi-party democracy. Our way of life seems so natural, so right to us, that we took for granted that once dictatorship was removed, Russia would reflect and assert our values. When Gorbachev first spoke about democratization and greater freedoms, we misheard his rhetoric because few of us understood that Russian history had given those words different meanings for him and his people. We expected that people who were politically inert for many decades would immediately know how to operate democratic institutions, how to take charge of their destinies. We imagined that only an entrenched old guard was blocking them, that once a few, both bad guys at the top were removed, the world of the average Russian would look like ours. To us, Gorbachev's perestroika, or casting off the old Stalinist dictatorship, made so much sense that we could not fathom how deeply embedded would the resistance to change among the vast majority of people be, even those who were deeply dissatisfied with their past. The swiftness of political change in Eastern Europe only compounded our misconceptions of what was really happening in Russia. Despite the fact that in 1989, the governments of Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Romania fell with such electrifying speed that it fostered the illusion that tyranny could be replaced by democracy overnight. But history has shown, ladies and gentlemen, that Russia, and at its heart, Mother Russia, is very different from its neighbors. As a society and a people, Russia is more difficult to change as it has been ruled by tsars and communist dictators for 5 centuries, with only very brief interludes of democratic reform, and those didn't last long. What is more, the dictatorial brand of Soviet socialism had its roots in Russia. It was not imposed by an alien army, as the Soviet armies imposed communist dictatorships on Eastern Europe. It was fired and hardened in the crucible of war, famine, terror, subjugation, and hard sacrifice, and it had and has its committed legions. Moreover, the Russians are a people who historically have needed a belief system, an ideology to live by, whether communism or Russian orthodoxy. Many are uneasy with a political system in which the guiding principles of public life are concerned with means, not ends. Russians look to the state and the ruler to provide an ideology and a purpose as well as law and order. So in the end, the collapse of the walls, both the Berlin Wall and the wall in the Soviet Union, between the rulers and the ruled, it's not the whole story, it was just the beginning. And therefore, no single leader can hope to see the process end. The process of forging a new and social, a new social and political order will be painful, it will be turbulent, and it will be prolonged. The battle will ebb and flow over many decades or more. It's impossible to crack an entrenched dictatorship without peril and bloodshed. Even from afar, those transformations now underway in Russia, they hold a special fascination for all of us, and not only because its success or failure will potentially affect our own destiny, our survival, and even the changing nature of our own society. Putin, in all his glory, is attempting to restore Russia to its old superpower status, to return the glory of Russia's imperial past, of Peter the Great. Putin, a former KGB officer, rules through his presidential apparatus, his siloviki. Now, for those of you that may not be knowledgeable about this term, siloviki has been defined by many in the intelligence world as former KGB or retired KGB officers. I, on the other hand, having spent almost my entire career here, do not believe this for 1 second. Because who set off a fire alarm? Dobre? Okay. I'll wait a second. Okay. Anyways, I'd personally and professionally never believed that anybody was a retired or ex-KGB. Once, from my experience and dealings with these people on occasion, once you swore allegiance to the sword and the shield, you died sword and the shield. And also included his power ministries, an array of military and security forces which report to Putin personally. Russia's political stability and economic growth was largely years ago through the gas and oil revenues, have helped the country's security and intelligence services strengthen their position. They rule. President Putin presides, in my own opinion, over a mafia state in which the power intermingles with a few interesting things: corruption, kleptocracy, and extrajudicial murder, in which his agencies, the now FSB, the Federalna Служба Безопасности, that's the domestic KGB, the SVR as it's known, is the foreign agency, and the GRU or the GRU still continues to be the military intelligence. They are all gainfully utilized to eliminate former intelligence operative turncoats, investigative journalists who pry too far, as well as political rivals. For example, one of his most outspoken opponents, liberal politician Boris Nemtsov, was murdered in February of 2015 on a Moscow bridge, shot 6 times in the back. One bullet wasn't enough. Given Putin's professional background as an intelligence officer, betrayal of Russia by intelligence professionals is a particularly odious offense, meriting not just instantaneous death, but symbolic assassination. On the other hand, both Alexander Litvinenko, former SVR officer, and Sergei Skripal, whose name you may recognize, he was a former member of the GRU or GRU, and he was one of the most productive spies of the post-Cold War period. They were made to theoretically suffer. These acts were characterized by gratuitous suffering and imbued with a strong political message. And to former collaborators, wherever you reside, I can and I will reach you. This theatrical revenge, even at the expense of large-scale diplomatic reprisals and biting economic cessions, reveals both the nature of the regime and its leader, who is contemporaneously a product and driver of the Russian state. These acts have serious implications for Western intelligence and security services that need to improve capabilities for protecting defectors in perpetuity. Putin has not hidden his willingness to engage in mokry dela or wet affairs. While Russian journalist and human rights advocate, and she was Ukrainian, Anna Politkovskaya from Kyiv, she was shot in a contract killing, and it happened to be on Putin's birthday. Don't remember this, October 7th, in her Moscow apartment. See? Nice. Ivan Safronov, a Russian journalist critical of Russia's military, died after falling from a 5th-floor window in Moscow the following year. People don't fall out of 5th-floor windows. The use of military-grade exotic poisons, or even radioactive ones, like in the case of Litvinenko, shows that assassinations are not mano a mano, but rather brings the full power of the state to bear against an individual, framing the situation as hopeless and futile. In 2013, Russian oligarch and Putin enemy, Boris Berezovsky, he was found hanged in his London home. Also, consider the enduring disfigurement that's happened to former Ukrainian President Viktor Yushchenko, who defeated the Kremlin's men in the 2004 presidential election. His face is forever scarred from military-grade dioxin poisoning, a permanent reminder of the penalty for challenging not just an autocrat, but also a state. And the 1978 murder of Bulgarian dissident Georgy Markov on Waterloo Bridge in England with ricin. This was classical. He was stabbed by a poisoned umbrella, including ricin, and before he took another 3 steps, he was dead. Although polonium-210 is a radioactive element and ricin is a toxin, and therefore not really a nerve agent in the family of Novichok, focusing on the specific poison obscures the pressing historical precedent given the various exotic ways in which the Kremlin's opponents have been poisoned since Markov's murder. The ease of getting away with it allows Putin to project strength, disdain, utter disdain for Western democracy and traditions of justice, and unlimited sense of Russian power at the strategic level. Putin's training as a Soviet-era intelligence officer imparted a worldview, not just of communism, but of loathing for, and this is important, in competition with the West. The goal of Soviet intelligence from day one has been the destruction of the Western democratic order. And this remains prominent in Putin's mind. We must not forget this. Ruski Mir is the new reality. Putin is Russia. The concept of information operations has its root in that of information warfare, which is the physical and computer-based operations, ladies and gentlemen, used by military forces to compromise the access to and viability of information received by the decision makers of an enemy, while at the same time protecting their own information and information systems. The term information operation is used to denote the use of information warfare tools and techniques at any time. And this definition has also evolved to reflect the need for a state to maintain national security by protecting its critical information infrastructure. 8 critical sectors in a state's infrastructure include oil and gas, water emergency services, continuity of government services, banking and finance, electric power, and telecommunications. Within the realm of information operations, there is no safe haven. Territorial boundaries become irrelevant, as I/O can be conducted at any time against both the public or the private sector. All other cyber activity, cybercrime, cyber terrorism, cyber war, net espionage, hacktivism, etc. This is all nothing but a subset of information operations. And this is part of the Russian ongoing hybrid warfare, which is all encompassing. The Russian special services utilize all of the above. Now, a few examples. In 2007, in April, following a diplomatic row with Russia over a Soviet war memorial, Estonia was targeted by a series of cyber attacks on financial, media, and government websites, which were taken down by an enormous volume of spam being transmitted by botnets in what is called a distributed denial of service attack. Over a lousy memorial, they shut down a country. They brought little Estonia, and it's a wonderful country, to its knees. With regards to Ukraine, and I'll only speak briefly on this issue, simply stated, there may be no better place to witness cyber conflict in action than in Ukraine today. Open warfare with Russia, a highly skilled, computer literate pool of talent, and a uniquely vulnerable political, economic, and IT environment have made Ukraine the perfect target for those looking to test new cyber weapons. In addition to the ongoing military conflict, Ukraine is also a tempting target because, why? So many of the country's computers run pirated software, which don't receive standard security patches, and because it's well integrated with Western European internet networks, the country offers a backdoor to hack the rest of Europe. The war in the East has given Russian hackers the opportunity to perfect their ability to launch cyber attacks with a series of major intrusions in Ukraine over the past several years. The annexation of Crimea and war in Donbass created a volatile political environment, even as Russian tanks crossed the physical border. Oh no, but maybe they weren't Russian tanks because they were only little green men sitting on them into eastern Ukraine. In 2014, Russian hackers were sending malicious code onto Ukraine's IT systems, providing political chaos as a smokescreen as well to the world. In 2015, targets were companies running Ukraine's power grid. The hackers used something called black energy malware. Also so-called kill disk malware later destroyed parts of the grid in Ukraine. But the world's most financially damaging attack occurred in 2017 when hackers, and I wonder whose hackers they were, utilized Petya and Eternal Blue. This NotPetya attack cost $10 billion to clean up, and this was as close to a cyber war as Ukraine has ever come to. But I remind you, from the very first day, the objective of Russia has been the total destruction of Western democracy. And to understand Putin's information war against Canada, there are two important aspects to comprehend. Number one, Russia does not recognize Canada as a fully independent political actor, and the strong Canadian anti-Russian sentiment is largely seen as a direct product of American influence. Secondly, the second aspect more concerning to Moscow is the constant pressure of the so-called Ukrainian lobby on the Canadian government and the simple strength and organization of the Ukrainian community in Canada. Today, ladies and gentlemen, numbering some almost 1.4 million. This fact itself sticks in the throat of the Russian bear sideways. And this is the reason for the necessity of information warfare against the enemy. And that is why Russian disinformation and propaganda have been aimed at Canadian parliamentarians of Ukrainian origin. A good example being the nasty disinformation campaign against the then sitting Canadian Foreign Minister, Pani Chrystia Freeland, with the direct aim of discrediting her personally and blackening of her family name. Unbelievable what they wrote, but she persevered because largely it was all lies. Additionally, view the very active Russian disinformation campaign against our Canadian armed forces on the ground in Latvia. For example, 2 days ago, they were spreading false information about our armed forces in Camp Adige and that all our forces were affected and they had contracted this COVID-19. Really? But when our Canadian troops intermingle with the local Latvians, these type of lies, they have their effect. From my experience, this very active and dirty disinformation campaign against the Ukrainian community began back in 1980, when the then conservative government of Prime Minister Mulroney established the Deschênes Commission of Inquiry into the presence of alleged Nazi war criminals residing in Canada. Russia would give us no peace. They first targeted the 1st Ukrainian Divizia, or the Ukrainian National Army. Lies, more lies, fabrications, half-truths, and downright lies were spread throughout Canada. For example, Russia focused on some alleged list of 202 non-commissioned officers of the Ukrainian division, which were presented to the commission as a list of Nazi war criminals living in Canada. Additionally, Russia began infiltrating published English language materials such as the SS Werewolves, author Borys Sirskyj. However, no such author existed. These were handcrafted KGB materials designed to cast aspersions on Ukrainian integrity and to sow confusion on this very touchy issue. There was no list of 202 Nazi war criminals. This was simply a list of Ukrainian division members who were non-commissioned officers. But you see how the truth is spun. Additionally, there were fabricated materials that linked the Ukrainian division to the destruction of Jews in Nazi concentration camps. However, the Ukrainian division never served in any such type of camp because when the Ukrainian division was overrun and destroyed by Russian forces at the Battle of Brody, one of 13 who survived, who walked away, made their way to the mountains of Yugoslavia and then surrendered to British forces, being interned in a prisoner of war camp in Rimini, Italy. Simply stated, the Ukrainian division was never involved in any types or crimes against humanity. During the war, there was a British, an American, and a Russian commission that examined the Ukrainian division for crimes against humanity. They found nothing because there were simply no such crimes. Please note, there was a Russian commission involved in this. Anyways, the KGB worked tirelessly to cast aspersions on the organized Ukrainian community, utilizing everything in its power to blacken it. This Russian disinformation campaign caused the Ukrainian community much hardship and suffering, including the good name of the Ukrainian division. The community had to raise $1 million at that time to defend its name, and it did so successfully. But at what cost? In the mid-90s, years later, another active campaign against the late Mr. Vasily Udensky as a Nazi war criminal forced the family of same to defend his good name. He was a 16-year-old boy, ladies and gentlemen, taken by the Germans to work in a concentration camps, unloading trains, doing hard physical labor. But these facts were never referred to casting further aspersions on his good name and character. A 16-year-old boy taken by the Nazi regime to work as a slave laborer. He was not a Nazi. As a Ukrainian, he was considered to be Untermenschen, subhuman. Secondly, they were not armed because only Germans bore arms. Basic historical research bears this out. And again, the Ukrainian community took another direct hit. More lies were perpetuated by the Russians to discredit the community. But as a community, we stood together. It supported Pan Vasily Udensky. God rest his soul. And then the Russian special services turned their attention to the Ukrainian insurgent army, the UPA, who fought simultaneously against two totalitarian regimes during World War II, and then an additional 15 years against the Soviet regime in the underground. Russia began spreading the myth of the Krvavi Banderivtsi, the bloody Banderites throughout Canada. Again, a strong disinformation campaign, which included the League of Ukrainians. Why this campaign of lies? More lies and total fabrications. And again, this took a toll on the good name of the Ukrainian community. Why? Because the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists and LUK, the League of Ukrainians, a wonderful organization, they became a strong voice of opposition to Russia and Canada, spreading the simple truth about the brutal murder and destruction of innocent Ukrainians in Russian concentration camps, by brutal execution, by imprisonment, and exile to Siberia and to other lands. A Russian reign of terror, by the genocide of millions of innocent Ukrainians, and especially children during the Holodomor. By the brutal regime of Stalin, But even this could not destroy the Ukrainian people, and the enemy could do nothing as the spirit to survive overcame everything. This gruesome record of purges, camps, mass execution, individual torture was written in blood in Ukraine. And then, ladies and gentlemen, it was rewritten Czechoslovakia, Poland, the wonderful Baltic countries, and Hungary. 80 million people were eradicated by Stalin. 80 million people. Скільки невинних людей були знищені. Боже, прийми їх до свого серця і даруй їм Царство Небесне, бо вони невинні. Тримай у своїй опіці всіх тих молодих воїнів в країні, коли сьогодні обороняють свою державу проти відвічного ворога і бережи їх від ворожих куль. Sorry, I diverted into Ukrainian just for a mere second to offer a very short prayer. For those 80 million innocent people that were destroyed by Stalin. And now you can maybe understand a little bit why I did what I did. And so Russia continued and continues its vile campaigns to tarnish the good Ukrainian name. A very funny way to show its love for a brother nation. One of the worst examples of Russian disinformation was a picture that appeared in Canadian newspapers from coast to coast just a few years ago. It was from the Ukrainian cemetery in Oakville, where the Ukrainian division and the UPA members are buried together, with a simple title, Ukrainian Nazi war criminals buried in Oakville. How low can you get in an information war? How low? The Russians they went it hands down. This picture itself, investigation revealed, was taken by a Russian diplomat from Ottawa from their own press bureau. And again, the community took a hit. The subject was later sanctioned and for propagating lies, disinformation, and downright hatred. In summarizing, we have noted the incorporation of information warfare and cyber dimensions for both offensive operations as well as defensive operations to twist the public narrative, to distract audiences, distort the truth, and sow discord and suspicion in Western public and government discourse. The West must understand that political murder, like intelligence collection, cyber operations, and information warfare are levers of Russian state power and unlikely to be abandoned, whatever the price. Putin's trolls are clearly one of his most effective weapons, running social media platforms into metaphorical battlefields. In the last decade, Putin has succeeded in destabilizing many parts of the world, from propping up al-Assad in Syria, gaining a port for the Russian Navy, and providing Assad with chemical warfare agents which Assad used on his own people. With this, he also weaponized the refugee stream. And this is so important to understand. Some 10 million people were thrown out of their country. And had Putin not supported Assad and put in a decent human being, 10 million refugees would have come home. With this, he also, and I repeat, weaponized the refugee stream, throwing European countries into turmoil with the ever-growing number of refugees at around 10 million, spreading fake information throughout many of these countries. Then he began a war in eastern Ukraine, invading Crimea, as well as shooting down the Malaysian airliner over Ukraine, as well as denying responsibility for same and blaming this on Ukraine. Well, Mr. Putin, we know your game now. Look at Russia's involvement in South America, Central America, their involvement in our own Canadian Arctic, the St. Volodymyr Cemetery issue, the Nazi war criminal issue, Borys Sirskyj, fabricated people who write these nonsense. Desecration of Stefan Bandera's grave in Munich. Disinformation campaign against Canadian NATO troops in Latvia and against the Ukrainian community. And these examples could go on and on. I could speak here till next winter. And so, with final words, Putin's Russia remains, in my professional and personal opinion, the greatest threat to world stability. All in all, it raised the specter of a further emboldened Russia, undertaking increasingly risky intelligence operations in various parts of the world with the expectation that the anticipated response will be worth the risk. For on many occasions, it was worth it because the world remained silent. When the little green men came into Ukraine, when Crimea fell, the world remained silent. And this is highly, highly reminiscent to me of 1968 when the Soviet tanks rolled into Czechoslovakia. Some of you will remember it. Most of you are probably too young. Yet, when they rolled in, the world remained strangely silent. And so, we must respond directly to this Russian disinformation campaign, not only individually, but as a community. Furthermore, there are many, many useful idiots which propagate Russia's and Putin's falsehoods. They have to be confronted by us, not by just the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress, the official spokesman, but people, by everyday people. We must keep vigilant an eye on Russia, especially now amid this COVID-19 crisis, because the crisis offers Russia a very unique opportunity to exploit the consequences of this pandemic, enabling it to reach its strategic objectives. Putin has not made a move in the last few years. Bear this in mind. Ukraine is not Russia's only target. The West has fallen into Putin's sights also. Witness the surge of false information being spread by Russia as part of Putin's wider effect to discredit the West and destroy his enemies from within. We must, I beg you, remain vigilant. And at that, I will end. I've spoken much too long. Thank you, God bless you, and I hope you've learned a little.
Пане Борис,
Прошу.
дякуємо вам за чудову презентацію. Я думаю, що ви дали загалом прекрасну таку велику картину, з чого починалося, як все починалося і в що перетворилося. Ми бачимо, як в інформаційний час, коли особливо зараз, коли всі дивляться, всі спілкуються за допомогою комп'ютерів і інтернету, наскільки інформація є важливою. Як хтось сказав, one tank battalion is expensive, but is probably as expensive as a TV station. But with one battalion, you cannot take a city. But well, depending what type of city. But with one TV channel, you can actually conquer the whole country, the whole society. This is what we are seeing in informational warfare. It's when the agent is trying to influence how we think, even forcing upon us its own discourse. If we look at the beginning of Russia-Ukraine war, especially in Donetsk, but even in Crimea, the Western TV stations, let's CNN, even CBC. They were trying to be objective, but they were still using the narrative, the terminology that was emanating from Moscow. That we have nothing to do with the little green man. It's not ours. You know, they bought the uniform, and we have. And then there is that movie, Crimea is Coming Home, where the president of the Russian Federation actually says proudly that he commanded this whole operation. So it's we're talking about a much higher level of special operations, which is targeting our cognitive abilities as we are acting out of our thinking. It all begins with the thought. So if you can alter the way you perceive reality, how you think about things, if you can force your discourse upon your opponent, that's a much cheaper and way more effective means of causing damage to that enemy. So can you share with us a little bit of your vision on what's like, how much Canada is vulnerable to that Russian narrative, to that disinformation, to that campaign? How, like, if you can look back in 2014 and now, do you think that Canadians, those who are interested in Ukraine, perceived this as an internal war? Did they actually buy the Russian narrative in the beginning, and how how Canadians see the situation now?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. An excellent question, but Canada is like any other country, as I mentioned. Every country is vulnerable. Canada also. They have gone after us because the Canadian government, starting with the former government of the former Conservative government, and the current Liberal government, who are strong opponents of what Russia has done in the world, and especially in Ukraine, this narrative from Russia will continue. It will continue, but Canada, thankfully, has been standing up to it. And I'm getting some funny noises. But yes, I mean, look, there are full idiots also in the press. Sorry, with any, I apologize to any of our Ukrainian press members because I'm not referring to them, but to those people that, spread the lies and hate of Putin throughout Canada. This is where they've made inroads. And if we, the people of Canada, do not contest these lies, nothing will happen. And as I said in my conclusion, it is so important that all of us individually take responsibility for some truth. Do you think Putin wants the truth about Stalin, that he eliminated 80 million people amongst not only Ukrainians, but our friends in the Baltic nations, tiny countries, but such wonderful people? God bless them. They perished. 80 million people. That's like 3 times the size of Canada. Unfathomable. And these are the kinds of truths that have to be brought out into the press. Because you know what? In the end, I think Putin, he's only afraid of one thing: Pravdu, truth. That's my opinion on that.
Thank you for this. We have a few questions now. From our participants. One question is from Montrealero. The question is: for 30 plus years in the field, you have witnessed the evolution of disinformation tactics. How has Canada fought Soviet propaganda in the past, and what can we do today against disinformation attacks?
Disinformation has been prevalent since, day one, when it was found that the KGB was in fact operating here. At the beginning, it took a few years because there was not a lot of experience in dealing with this type of information or disinformation. However, with time, we developed our own expertise in this area, and we started replying to them in many different ways, and a lot I can't really go into because they're highly classified, and I cannot discuss this in public venues. But suffice it to say, I think Canada and its agencies has a very good grip on what's happening today. And I mean, look, Putin took a direct stripe at Pani Chrystia Freeland. They thought they were going to cause her irreparable damages, to her family, but it didn't go, because once was shown where the lies lay and what was the truth, I think finer minds prevailed. So I think this is the way I would answer that. There's no direct answer to this, because every day these things, they change, and yet they have to be confronted. When you see downright lies, half truths being propagated, reply to this individually and also as a community.
Thank you. And we also have a question from Pavlo. It's in the same vein. Is Canadian government taking this Russia's hybrid information warfare seriously? I think from what you have just shared with us, we have reasons to believe that it is.
Listen, of course they're taking it seriously. I was in Latvia with our troops, and the lies that were spread at the beginning, because the Canadian troops, as you know, were the lead contingent in the NATO forces there. And so they started spreading lies that, our soldiers were out there getting drunk and accosting young Latvian women. This was all gross disinformation. But when you have a tiny little country like that, in which our Canadian troops intermingle with the people, because on occasion they did have leave and they would come downtown, they go to restaurants or whatever. But our troops were exceptionally well behaved. They were gentlemen. They did not engage in frivolous behavior. But the Russians tried to sow discord. And of course, there were Latvians that believed it, because it was being thrown at them through the Russian language news publications, through the press, through the radio. And again, just 2 days ago, there was another, as I mentioned, against another insidious attack on our troops, that they are all laden with coronavirus and they're spreading it. Outright lies.
So there is no stop. Oh, sorry. There is no stop to that. They're quite active in terms of picking up current events. We have a couple of questions from A. The person is asking about the comments below CBC News articles. Often that he says often appears to be pro-Russian. What can we do to fight them? Well, my understanding is that there are lots of trolls. We know about Trolls Factory in St. Petersburg. Is there a way, in your opinion, of effectively fighting the trolls?
Well, you fight trolls with trolls, but unfortunately, we don't have those type of trolls here in Canada. I think perhaps maybe it's time that we started training our own. But if they're, for example, if they're disseminating false news on the CBC, I mean, you have a right to approach. The CBC, I think, are very approachable people there. And this is the type of campaign that one has to lead. Because if you sit silent, it's one thing to bitch, whine, and complain. But if nobody addresses the issue, then how are they to know? You see, that's the thing. We have to society has to be proactive on its own also.
Well, and that same person is saying that, maybe the Canadian government is proactive, but the average Canadian, I'm sorry to say, has no idea about. Well, it's understandable. Why should an average Canadian be particularly concerned about Russian informational warfare when when Ukraine is mostly and Ukrainian diaspora is under attack, right? Mm-hmm. We have an interesting question from just a moment about your opinion about the relationship between Russia and China in this whole framework. What do you think?
Russia and China, two of the biggest countries that are stealing information from Canadian companies are attacking. There are 4 countries in the world: Korea, Russia, China, and Iran. The top 4 countries that have penetrated the West for information, stealing their industrial secrets and things like that. There you have it in a nutshell. The 4 countries that are most known for their proclivities in
the 2 countries, you mean Russia and China?
Oh, Russia and China, but also the other 2, Iran and thing. I don't think they're exactly in a love boat together, but they have their own dealings. I can't comment too much on China because I was not an expert in that area, and I don't wish to sully the field. But you can bet your britches, as 2 communist regimes, there will be competition. I mean, look at Ukraine today. China's buying up, and I'm getting a little concerned. Vast tracts of land, and I don't know how much Canadians are aware of this. Why are they doing this? At whose expense? Is it for them, or are they buying it up, perhaps for Putin's interests? And the Ukrainian government should really be looking at these things.
Definitely, but Ukraine has so many issues of its own right now. Okay, we have another question from Ivan Paramonov. Do you believe that Putin builds a new strategy based on incompatible mix of imperial agenda, Stalinism, and cult of great patriotic war, plus so-called Crimean reunification and the contemporary concept of Russian world? What do you think? Is Putin building a new ideology mix? I don't think he's building any ideology.
No, I don't think so. I think Putin, as I stated earlier, wishes to restore Russia's former Tsarist glory. I mean, he's been booted out of every single international organization that exists. And this to him is probably the greatest rebuke that he can face. But I don't think he's going to change to a new, some kind of, new ideology. No, he's pursuing the old, typical, Soviet hardline manner witnessed by, what's going on in Ukraine. He's not going to give up. He's not going to give up on Ukraine. He is pushing his agenda through his own agents, through people that are recruited or his own useful tools, and he's going to push it because look. My own belief is it's very simple here. He does not wish to see Ukraine as an independent country.
Well, that's clear. It seems like. Moreover, it doesn't. I don't think that the current president of Russia is the only person who is following that agenda. There are a bunch of hawks that are they cannot see Ukraine just take off. That will definitely remain. Okay, we have another question from Ulana Pidmazetsky. Yesterday at the OSC in Vienna, the rep from Russia tried to prevent and interrupt speeches they didn't like from Ukraine, and another expert on the security situation in the Black Sea and Azov Sea. We will see in the next few days how it will be analyzed in Western media, where the disinformation is being perpetuated through Western institutions. Do you think that this is simply a contemporary extension of the decades-long Russian KGB special operation Retribution, возмездие?
I don't think it's retribution. It's just, that's their everyday state of affairs. That's the way they are. That's the way they were. And that's what they're going to continue to pursue. Because they want, Putin craves legitimacy. They're looking for legitimacy, though I find it sometimes hard to understand how they're going to attain legitimacy when you listen to people like Lavrov spouting utter lies, or using these types of disruptive tactics to not allow a member of another country to speak. Like, really? But that's Russia. That's Putin.
Oh, there it is. We have a comment and a question from Olena Kohan. Thank you, Mr. Boris, for this presentation. Thank you for such powerful support. I really hope that Ukraine will win the information war with Russia and will return territories and people. I would like to ask, how do you think how to communicate with people who now live in the occupied territories and in the Crimea? Use Ukrainian propaganda or other methods or tools? What do you think? How can Ukraine use, or should Ukraine use its own propaganda to fight Russian propaganda?
Well, I would choose not to really comment on that because I'm not a Ukrainian citizen and I don't wish to offend Ukraine in what particular tactics they should be using. But listen, they have contacts. I mean, witness what's happening to the Kremsky Tatari, the Crimean Tartars. Look at their, we have with us a wonderful lawyer, Pan Andriy Semotyuk, who could probably fill you in much more greater detail about the abuses of human rights of our Crimean brothers, of what's going on there, incarceration, tortures. It's unbelievable. So I think that question would probably be, better posed to somebody from Ukraine. And I did not work for the Ukrainian government, unfortunately. If they offered me a position, I would gladly accept being Holova SBU for a couple of years. Pan Semotyuk would be my lawyer.
All right. There is an interesting question from Maggie Sterlikova. Is there any chance that because of this further Putin's politics, the Russian Federation might disintegrate into the separate states? If this happened, what consequences could be expected? Would they affect Ukraine somehow? What do you think?
Well, that's an excellent question. However, I don't have that type of crystal ball to see the implosion of Russia as it stands today. I don't think that's not even a remote possibility, because look what's going on there. I mean, it's a police state. It's run by the KGB, the new KGB, the FSB, the SVR, and the GRU. I don't see any possibility for that at this point. Not while Putin lives. Not while Putin lives. And also depending on who would succeed him. if you have another hawk like Lavrov, then I think we'd probably be in for much worse times than we have right now. But to me, how can it be worse? How can it get worse?
There it is. But there is also an opinion that the West itself is not interested really in Russia disintegrating, because that will cause havoc. The US demonstrated it in 1991, and Britain as well, when they urged Ukraine not to separate, because everybody's afraid of the nukes, and obviously if Russia does disintegrate, it will definitely have an influence on Ukraine, because
of course,
because it's a neighbor. There's a huge border with Russia. So do you think that the West will rather not allow Russia to disintegrate if it was on the brink of disintegration?
Personally, I don't think that they would intervene in the internal affairs of another country. I mean, look at Ukraine. We had the second largest nuclear arsenal on the face of this planet. And yet President Bush, what did he say? Give it up. And so what did we do? Or what did Ukraine, not we, what did Ukraine do? It gave it holus bolus to Russia. It was supposed to receive fiscal reparations in the billions of dollars, which it probably never received a penny for. And yet, had we kept those nukes, I think maybe the balance of power would have been a little bit different today. And perhaps Putin would have, considered not sending his little green men into Crimea or eastern Ukraine in the Donbass. However, Ukrainians are like Canadians. They have big hearts. They believe everything. They gave it away.
There it is. Okay, we have a question from Marko Levitsky. The two greatest purveyors of Russian disinformation in the mainstream media, Bob Pugliese,
yes.
Pugliese of the Ottawa Citizen, are both based in Ottawa. Pugliese pieces are picked up by the Post media newspapers. Is the Ottawa community taking any action to protest Pugliese's blatant disinformation?
Well, I'm not in the executive of the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress. Personally, I haven't seen anybody tackle them. But again, as I mentioned, I think it's imperative that when things like this appear, that first and foremost, Ukrainian-Canadian Congress, with its leadership, take a role in this, even the local UCC branch, and as well as individual people have to start addressing and confronting this.
All right.
But I'm not aware of any concerted campaign to tackle those pro-Russian journalists.
Okay. In the meantime, we have another information from Sokira. You mentioned the best way to fight propaganda is truth. What social groups in Canada are the most vulnerable to Russian propaganda? Are there Canadians of the Ukrainian origin who are also under this informational influence? What the Ukrainian community can do about it? Can you comment on the role of the Embassy of Ukraine?
Well, I think the role of the Embassy of Ukraine has been astounding. From what I've seen, they have tackled these hard issues. They are tackling them, and first and foremost, I think it lies in the realm of their responsibility. Again, they represent Ukraine. I cannot speak for Ukraine because I am not a citizen of that country, or none of us are. But I think they're doing a commendable job, especially with the new young ambassador, Shevchenko. He's not afraid to address issues. He has addressed as well as his diplomats have addressed different issues. So I'm very proud of them.
Okay, and unlike other ambassadors in the world that were supposed to be changing with the new administration in Kiev, Andriy Shevchenko stayed, and I think it's a good sign, don't you think, to maintain the relationship?
I think it's a wonderful sign. He's a wonderful, competent ambassador. He represents his country extremely well, and he's not a pushover. Let me tell you, if somebody confronts him, he will go after them. He's not a pussycat. Tony Yakicha. He stands up for his country. God bless him for that.
All right, we've been we've been live for quite a while, so we'll be slowly wrapping up. So please think about the short and very specific questions that you would like to ask Pan Boris for the next few minutes. Meanwhile, Pavel, how you distinguish a useful idiot and an active counterintelligence agent or bot in the world of surveillance, capitalism, and the growing machine prevalence?
Whoa.
that's a heck of a question.
Well, I'll tell you right now, you won't recognize a professional right off the bat because professionals operate in a little much quieter fashion in the netherworld, not so much in the open. So, if you're looking for lessons to catch, a Russian operative, I can't give you that lesson.
Because can you move the glass in front of your screen there? We can't see you.
Oh, sorry. It's just water. It's not vodka.
There it is. Okay, we have a comment about another personality, journalistic personality beside Puglisi. His name is Taylor. That is also apparently taking the Russian narrative and spreading it across the society. Well, what can an open society do about that? I mean, there is freedom of speech, and Russia is definitely abusing that and using that.
There is freedom of speech, but freedom to lie is a totally different subject matter here. So that's why I say that individuals as well have to tackle these journalists who some will distort facts on their own. Some useful idiots are given the material, from the Russian side. But these, like I said, truth is power. If you provide the truth, then it will have an effect. Of course, not at all times. I mean, we can't win it all. But if there's serious issues, then they should be addressed. We have the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress. We have a wonderful UCC CEO here who also is not, a little putty cat in somebody's lap. He will confront things. And the UCC has done an admirable job and wonderful job on many occasions when negative information or downright lies have been thrown at the Ukrainian community. So we have our methods by which we should operate.
So in other words, the better strategy is not to remain silent, as if just ignore those comments and those articles, but to actually confront them as to where they got the facts and why are they repeating somebody else's false narrative.
When we remain silent, Russian tanks roll into Czechoslovakia, 1968. When we remain silent, they run and took over Crimea.
There it is. All right. So I think we went through. Yeah.
Can I ask? I think Redactor Marko Levitsky would like to ask something here. Can he ask directly?
Levitsky?
Yes.
Okay, let's see.
Dайте ему microphone. He's a wonderful journalist.
Can you hear me?
No, I can.
You can?
Yes.
Okay, good. Now, I'd like to shed some information on Puglisi. They are more than just useful idiots. They are actually
Sorry, we lost you there. There was an interruption in your voice.
I would say that Puglisi and Taylor are not just useful idiots, but are active agents. Are you having problems?
Active agents. You said you were, and after active agents, it disappeared again. Hello?
Can you hear me here?
Oh, yeah, I think I lost my hearing now.
No, can you hear me on this one?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to, hold on, I'm going to go to the end of the room. That's why I picked the second device, because sometimes I had trouble with that one. But anyway, the point I wanted to make was Puglisi and Taylor are more than just useful idiots. They're active agents of Russian disinformation. One of the latest pieces Puglisi wrote was he wrote about the Sambir Memorial, where Ukrainian and Jewish groups participated together to commemorate UPAV and Jewish victims of Nazi terror. He grossly distorted the story. He simply ignored the fact that the chief rabbi Bleich of Ukraine was there. He got a guy from some pro-Russian Jewish organization to say the Jewish groups were upset. This guy is a guy who contributes to Novorossiya Today. When people read that story, they thought that, Ambassador Vastruk had done a terrible thing or whatever. And that was the purpose, was to attack Vastruk. The thing is, people believe the stuff. Puglisi is more than just a useful idiot. He is deliberately distorting facts and transferring this, and it's being picked up by Post Media. The only newspaper that printed a rebuttal to his that piece was the Edmonton Journal, and that's because we have a lot of Ukrainians here. Tabate wrote a letter to the National Post, and basically it was ignored. And I think what the problem is, this goes beyond just irresponsible journalism. This deliberate Russian propaganda, and I think the Ottawa citizens should be told that this guy is deliberately propagating, deliberately distorting facts. He's a grossly irresponsible journalist. He's an unethical journalist and should be fired.
Marco, thank you for your comments. I think we heard you all, but we are not in a position to fire him or do anything else about it. But thank you for your comment. Okay, we have an interesting question from Irina Bozhevska. We haven't touched upon that topic yet, and this is a very powerful tool that the Russian state is employing, the Russian Orthodox Church. She is saying that the Russian Orthodox Church has very much influence on decision-making in the post-Soviet space. And how do you think, is there a way of breaking that vicious circle between the Russian state and the church? Because the matter is sensitive, it's a matter of people's religious beliefs. Well, in my personal opinion, if I may interject here, we just have to inform people, or the Ukrainian government needs to, and I think it's doing its part, at least in part, about informing people of the role of the church in politics.
If I can just add 2 cents worth, I'd like to remind the listeners that the Russian church was the head of the church in Pimen's day. He was a colonel general in the KGB. The church is been used. Many clerics have been known to have been members of the KGB. I mean, look what happened in Ukraine recently with this COVID. The Moscow Patriarchate said, stay open. You know, let people come into the churches. Oh, that's nice. Oh, the head of the Moscow Patriarchate says, stay open. Infect Ukrainians. I call that criminal.
And
that's my personal opinion. And how many people became sick over that?
There is a very interesting, Irina, there is a very interesting broadcast on Ukrainian Dormition Cathedral's Facebook page. It's a talk between Father Igor Okhremchuk and a priest from Ukraine who is a scholar and who teaches at in California. He specializes in ecclesiastical affairs. Kirill Hovorun, his name is. And he exactly said what Pan Boris is just saying now. Being a church scholar, he says that was simply criminal to force people to get together.
Moreover, there was an article. I just want to add one more thing for your knowledge. In Ukraine, there was a priest from the Moscowski Patriarchate, from the Moscow Patriarch, who was a sniper in the Donbass. Really? No, maybe I don't understand English very well, but how the hell can you be a priest on one hand and a sniper on the other hand? I had to control my remarks on that one.
Boris, thank you very much for your presentation. I'll be wrapping up with a small, with your permission, with a small anecdote. It actually comes from a colleague of yours, in a way, from the military intelligence officer and a former head of SBU, Igor Smeshko, General Igor Smeshko. Once he was invited to Moscow as a politician, I believe, and as a member of an official delegation, he was shown the rebuilt Christ the Savior wonderful cathedral in Moscow. And as he was shown the inside, the person who was showing him, he said, well, Mr. Smeshko, would you would like to make a confession? And here comes the priest, and all of a sudden Smeshko looks at him, and he looks at Smeshko. They knew each other. That was a Russian KGB spy who served somewhere in the West, in the priest's robes. So Russian Orthodox Church is known to be a tool, a useful tool. So on this positive note of being there and searching for the truth, we'll be wrapping up our broadcast. Pavlo, Semen, do you have anything to add?
I would like just to say thank you to Pan Boris for your informative presentation. I think we were able to cover a lot in such a short period of time. Thank you, Platon, for your guidance tonight as the moderator. And a special thank you I want to say to our president, Simon Sulema, who actually assisted us with the technical support, and it wouldn't be possible without him. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and I hopefully we will see you soon. Have a good night and na dobranic.